Welcome back, everyone, to IT Horror Stories with Jack Smith. I am, as always, Jack Smith, and across the table, Philip is back.
Hello, everyone.
Everyone, Philip, I've asked you to join because I want to dig into your brain on your expertise on industrial printing.
Yes.
Looking at some projects done in the later years here, I noticed that quite a lot of folks have little to no idea on how to do printing once you go beyond your local desk printer.
A lot of printers that are, not your common house kitchen printer you usually use at your home. There are things like industrial printers and bigger format printers and things like that. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is all going beyond the local desktop. We will not go into, although we could and should, about all the ink subscriptions from some companies, and Magenta is out, so I won't print black and white. This is not what we're going to cover here today. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to start, first of all, about some industrial printing, and here's some examples of projects that I have done, and I guess Philip will have some of his own as well. And the first one I wanted to touch on was a larger transport company where we had, I think, about 250 printers over Europe spread out, big office, small office. And in the end, it was one of my first projects there still as an engineer. We managed to use about 6 drivers on Windows. So the time scale was Windows 2000. And every printer back then had their own little driver package, and we managed to use some kind of mini driver that was compatible. We had a LaserJet 4 driver, HP, LaserJet 4050 driver, and those all talk PCL 5, PCL 6. PCL being the language that printers speak amongst themselves. And we were able to narrow that down to 4 to 5 drivers for all the stuff, which I was pretty impressed about myself.
Yeah, that is pretty impressive because I know for a lot of things you also need different kinds of drivers. Like PCL is fine for general document use and things like that, but if you go into the whole graphical aspect and like desktop publishing and things like that, a lot of them use like PostScript drivers.
Yeah, luckily the warehouse distribution does not use a lot of DTP applications there,
Yeah.
but we will get back to some other stuff. Now, I think we had a few PCL drivers. Of course, you could select all the trays. You could say tray 2, tray 3, tray 4, this kind of paper. You could select it. What you would not have was the nice picture of the printer with all the modules, like your folding module, your stamping module, whatever. They were all there. You could select them, but you didn't see the nice picture.
Yeah.
So, whatever. Then the second bunch of drivers was basically using the generic Windows driver, and we used that for the impact printers for the customs department, because those were big-ass impact printers doing pre-numbered sheets of custom documents, and boxes and boxes and boxes per day went through that. And then I know there was one specific printer that had to have its own driver, was for a office in Spain where, cliche-wise, the secretary of the site director had its own color printer, and there they needed a PostScript driver because of all the fancy logos that they printed.
Yeah.
We put in a specific printer just for that one person. That was driver number 6. Everything else ran on the other 5 except that special one. And then coming to the impact printers for customs, actually most of those were actually connected to mainframe or SAP and were connected directly. So they were all IP printers, they were on the network, and they would get their jobs from the mainframe. That was easy for us. We did not have to care.
Okay, because I can imagine that managing printers on like SAP and mainframes is a whole story in of itself. So.
Yeah, and one I am not familiar with. I wasn't then, I am not now. We could, of course, say, yeah, there is a printer problem, sure. I am using it in my 3270 terminal emulation software, or I am in my SAP client. Well, sorry, I have no idea. We go to the support tool, we assign this to the mainframe queue or the Unix queue or the SAP queue, and off you go, basically. That was what we did back there.
I remember in my days at an undisclosed printer company where we had to do field installs that I sometimes had to install printers on AS400, so that's also quite the experience.
you have to make a queue or an address somewhere, and then they have to send things to it. And I always left that up to the AS400 guys or the mainframe guys. Like I feel like here's the IP address of the printer. It's connected. It's pingable. You do your work on here. I'm not going into your configuration. This is a world I am not familiar with.
Yeah.
You do notice that in many logistics, so trucks, airplanes, trains, a lot of older impact printers, because just the sheer volume that they still do.
In my case, it was also, we do the basic stuff, and other than that, the AS400 maintainer does their voodoo magic, and yeah.
Exactly. We basically throw this into a different cubicle, like, hey, here you go, because I know that I'm having had some merger and acquisition projects. If you see the number of people that is involved in getting a printer operational is ridiculous. You'll have your supplier bringing over the machine and setting it up. Then you have one guy that has to come in and put the network cable to hook it up, one that has to come put in the power cable to hook it up. You have then the network team that has to assign an IP address to it. Another technician will come in and set the printer up and connect it to the network. Then you need to talk to your Windows, Unix mainframe guys to configure a queue or a spool or whatever. And then you go to application developers or to the on-site support guys to get the printer configured on the local PCs. Did I mention 10 people already?
Yeah, about that, I suppose.
It's mind-boggling how much goes into getting a printer online. And of course, you do understand the guys say, oh yeah, no, I just connect my printer at home through USB and it works.
Oh, my sweet summer child.
Yes. And yes, it does. But then you end up with 250 printers, of which 200 different models, of which 170 different ink cartridges or toners or whatever, and it becomes such an unmanageable clusterfuck that no. And I had one CIO back then, 20 years ago. We had the problem that everybody had their own little diskjet printer with a small little laser printer, and we were centralizing, and his quote was, "Not a single document is so secret that you cannot walk 20 meters to get it from the printer."
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, and that worked. Although now this is mostly fixed with these follow me printing systems that you have. So you have your access badge or a token or a code that you print into a generic spool, and then no matter which printer you go to with your code, it comes out over there. I think those are simplifying it a lot these days.
Yeah, and it helps a lot with user experience and things like that as well, because there were instances that I remember that people would print something and it would roll out of some random printer in the hallway.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, Linda from accounting comes to the printer and takes it with her, and the document is missing, and yeah.
The payroll intern prints all the pay slips to the one printer and forgets about it and prints it to another one. Stuff like this has happened.
Yeah.
And that's your larger desktop printing, because it's larger printers, larger volume, you centralize them a bit, and that is taken care of. And now the next one that everybody tends to forget are label printers. And then I don't mean your small label printer that you do to print your freezer bag labels on, but the big industrial ones for logistics, address printing, shop labels, whatever. And we mentioned PCL earlier, that they'll you can talk PCL. These don't talk. They talk their own different markup language, because you have squares, underlines, you have barcodes, you have some logos that go in there, and it's all put together in. It's not an HTML file, but it is some kind of markup, and that's being sent off on the different printer, and off you go. That is really voodoo science to me, label printers.
We choose not to have any subscription model nor sponsoring in order to keep our stories accessible for each and everyone. To support us, please check our merchandise at shop.ithorrorstories.eu or buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com/ithorrorstories.
Yeah, and in the category, kind of on a smaller scale, you also have point-of-sale printers, which usually, in most of the cases, not always, don't even use like a printer driver. They usually are talking serial.
Exactly, that's what I meant. You don't have a spooler, it's a serial port, it spits out commands.
Yeah.
There was one example that I've had a big issue with getting to work on a Windows machine because Windows spools its print jobs. Now, this was not allowed to being spooled, and that was airline tickets.
Okay.
Back then, and I think even now, but now with electronic ticketing, it's not so much of an issue. You were not allowed to spool airline tickets because you had to be sure that they would only be printed once.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But now do it technically on a Windows machine that says, I have a spooler.
Yeah, and then you're in for a wild ride.
That
I
was
imagine.
a configuration that I don't even recall how we solved it. I think the software did something that it, of course, a parallel port printer.
Mm-hmm.
And we sent it to, okay, here's the parallel port, and it talked to the printer as also directly. It did not use the Windows spooler, and then it was some kind of those thermal printers that spit out your baggage labels, your baggage tags.
Yeah.
It was something comparable, and then the paper airline tickets would come out. Of course, tells you how long ago it is because you're talking paper. Like, who still uses paper tickets? If you show up at Ryanair with a paper ticket, you get a fine.
Nowadays, there's an app for that.
And you have to use it. It's so this is how long ago this is. But yeah, this is some of the examples. And also that printing is actually mission critical. If you look at a truck, they have loading documents that they have to be able to show at point of destination or when there is a customs check on the road to show these documents. If you cannot print those documents, your truck cannot drive. Same goes with airlines. You have something called a weight and balance sheet for cargo planes, where containers are put into positions. We can do a different episode on that one day. And if the captain doesn't sign off on it, you don't fly. So printing does become mission critical very quickly where you don't expect it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, that something simple, quote unquote simple, as printing is something that can be very mission critical.
Exactly. If your stupid LaserJet 4000, 5000, 6000 says, I'm out of cyan, so I won't print black and white, but you have an entire airport of planes waiting to lift off, literally, imagine that.
It's a whole new kind of chaos.
Chaos is not the word I would use, but yes, it is indeed something that if your receipt at the supermarket doesn't print you go like, These days, you have QR codes for everything, or you show your concert ticket on your phone. But no, in the old industries, it is manual signatures that have to go on physical pieces of paper that go into a physical file. Okay, sure, you have some programs where you're now using tablets and digital signatures, but that's a minority. If you're somewhere in a small airport where they don't have that, then tough, because the load sheet has to stay in the airport. It doesn't go, well, it can go with the airplane, but the local airport have to have a sign off that the loading was done and signed off by the captain.
Yep.
That's one. But we were on label printers, which, as you said, with serial, but you have also SAP or other ERP systems just printed them directly, that it's beyond imaginable what they do.
Yeah, and then there's, to get back to the serial printers, like if you go into the whole point of sale world, yeah, they have protocol that they usually use it's called ESC POS. It's made by Epson, and the majority of point of sale printers still use that to this day. If you think that serial protocol is deprecated, I beg to differ. And I'm not talking about USB, by the way. It's not universal serial bus in this case. It's actually serial, as in 9600 baud serial.
I do recall that when you're at a supermarket and you can see the back of the printers or the point of sale system, because as an IT, you look like, what are they using for connections?
Yeah.
You see still an awful lot of DB9 serial ports on the back there.
Yes. DB9 and DB25 is usually the way they do it on the printers themselves. There's a lot of them that have USB, but underneath it's still the same old protocol. They just basically put a converter between them, so it's like internally in the printer. So it's really not the same as your common desktop HP, Brother, what have you, printer at home.
If only. And then one topic that I've also had for a few customers were then really the high volume printers.
Yes.
Where you don't have one printer, but you have like a room
Yes.
that is a printer.
I like to call those printers the little document trains.
Little is not the word I would use.
Yeah, exactly. It's that was kind of sarcastic, but yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I missed it.
Yeah, those machines take up basically like a whole room in some cases. But these are machines that are able to not only print, but they're able to fold, they are able to staple. Basically, you can tell them, look, this is my booklet. I need it to be folded, I need it to be stapled, and I need the end product to be put in an envelope. And basically, it spits out envelopes with every booklet that you need in bulk.
That sounds expensive.
Yes, that's really not cheap. So, and a lot of them are very, very fast as well. I've seen printers like that can print like 120 documents per minute, which is insanely fast.
That's 2 envelopes a second.
Yes.
And then that has to be printed, has to be folded, all perfectly aligned, stapled, glued, thrown in the envelopes. That's some hardcore engineering going on.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of them use specialized software as well, obviously. So
do you just send them and say print and then it just does it? Or do you have to make a special magic PDF? How does that?
No, so what usually happens is that the designer makes their design, and when it's approved, it gets sent to what's called a RIP server. Those are specialized computers upwards of 5,000 euros.
Mm-hmm.
Basically Windows machines, or I think they used Solaris at one point as well, that would read the raw file of the designer.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, you can still adjust colors and, the whole contrast, and they're calibrated with specialized hardware. And then it gets thrown in the queue with your settings, and that takes...
This podcast features Jack Smith and guests. We say thank you to our demo scene friends who helped making this podcast possible. Commander Homer for editing, Danko for music and audio advice, NetPoet for additional voiceovers.
Of everything.
And then the machine says yes sir and starts printing, folding, stapling, enveloping, address labeling.
Yes.
Do you have an envelope lick module?
I don't think that they actually glue the envelopes shut, but the folding and putting it in the envelope, that does happen.
I know I've seen those was some kind of weird postcarding printing company that they had this design your own postcard web shop.
Yeah.
It wouldn't go automatically, but they would get the order and then go into the Print-O-Matic.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would spit out the card in 50, 100, 200, 500 copies, whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
And then it would... you've forgotten the bundler.
Yes.
Where it takes 10 cards and puts them together with a little paper strap. You've forgotten the bundler.
Yeah, there's like a ton of modules, because these machines are modular. So you can basically get the normal base unit and then put like a stapler next to it and a folder and a bundler and the envelope folding machine and blah, blah, blah. You can basically just make them as long as you want, as long as you have the funds to.
Everyone that says, wow, we at the office, we have a color laser printer with 3 trays and then a folding station at the end and a scanner on the top. You're just a bunch of losers because you don't have a bundler.
Yeah, exactly. So those are considered very basic machines in that world. So.
You also mentioned something about the designers.
Yes.
Do we have to be afraid of some kind of fruit-minded people here?
Oh, yes. Well, not afraid, but making things work on computers from a certain fruit company is an adventure in itself.
Well, they're not called Pear, they're called Apple, so we can do that. We can name Apple because we've never worked for them. We can do this.
A lot of DTP companies are exclusively working on Mac.
Still?
Because
tradition
and kind of grandfathering, I guess, but a lot of them still work on Mac devices, which is fine. I mean, you use what you're used to. When it comes to the technical side, let's just say that in the years that I worked at this certain company, I've gotten to know the common Unix printing system pretty well.
I would imagine that if you're doing lots of DTP, either you send it off to a printer or you have your own print-o-matic with that RIP server, and that would handle that.
One of two choices. A lot of them do draft prints on like a smaller machine or just do it directly on the train without going through the RIP. But of course, the color calibration is then way off. But it's mostly to show the higher-ups, look, this is how it kind of looks.
And then it goes out for a few thousand copies and mailings.
Yeah, the CUPS system, so the Unix printing system is... that's quite a different beast.
Summarize, please, because I am coming from the world of Windows, as you know.
So you have the driver land as you are used to it on Windows.
Well, let's just say I still have nightmares from printer drivers in kernel mode on NT4.
Yeah.
If your NT4 would blue screen, it was always your printer driver because of the kernel model that they used, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah, fortunately, I haven't encountered any kernel panics when installing a printer driver on a Mac machine, but I think CUPS is kind of an abstraction layer. Well, not really an abstraction layer, but it's a way to manage your drivers. And we were talking earlier about the AS400 machines and mainframes and things like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of in the same philosophy in the sense that CUPS is a background service that you run on Linux or Unix or Mac machines.
And
that will basically handle your printing needs.
And that's then your gateway to the driver that will translate to printer speak.
Yes, exactly. But that also means that you have to set up the printer, or each printer that you have in the environment, you have to set it up in CUPS. At least when I was working there. It might have changed now. I haven't touched a Mac in a professional setting in like 15 years. So
your opinion on print servers, because opinions differ, and I have mine, others have theirs. But say, what is your preference? Would you like to work with one centralized print server with one central spool? Or would you configure each printer as a network printer, so with an IP port on each individual workstation?
In a professional setting, definitely centralized. Even if it's just to make sure that every client has the same settings. Because if you have to install it on every client separately, that's just a nightmare waiting to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is the same driver, the same master settings.
Yes.
I agree with that, because once you get into bigger organizations, say, once you go over 10, 15 people, you have to do it. Over 5, you can still go, okay. And you would make it your file and print server. Of course, now these days, the file server no longer exists. It becomes a cloud storage. Then you still need something to centralize your printing, which might be an issue because you don't really have a machine for that. It gets tacked onto something else. In the Windows world, sadly, your domain controller, which please don't, but okay. As you said, once you get into the larger environments, you have either centralized print spool or you have a follow me system, which is installed these days if you're really going for the few hundred people offices or a few thousand people offices.
Yeah. And those follow me systems are actually very common nowadays. You know, back in the day, it was, we have to install printers everywhere, so we have to centralize it, and we have to make sure that every printer driver is installed on every machine and blah, blah, blah. But with those follow me systems, it's really a walk in the park.
It is. I was surprised at a few big corporations that say, like, wait, you don't have a follow me system on your printers? It's really easy. It is building number, floor number, room number, and then it's M for monochrome and C for the color printer next to it. What? Can't I just walk up with my badge and go beep or type a code? It was an issue with procurement. Shall we summarize? Printing is more complicated than your local desktop printer at home or even in your small business.
Yeah.
You can reuse printer drivers. You'd be surprised how many current PCL printers you can get to work on the old LaserJet 4000 or LaserJet 4 PCL drivers. They work, and if you have like 1 or 2 trays, they work just fine. Of course, when you start scanning, copying, different story. Mainframes have their own printing system, as does SAP. Unless you're in that world, you don't have to care about that. Label printers have their own stuff. High volume, make sure you get the bundler.
Yes.
That was my rant on printers. Something to add from your side, Philip?
No, not right now. things are sometimes bigger than they seem to be when it comes to IT. So
printers are a TARDIS, they're bigger on the inside.
you would be surprised.
Okay, well, to quote Jeremy Clarkson, on that bombshell, we shall conclude the episode here. Thanks for tuning in on two old men talking about their printers. This was IT Horror Stories with Jack Smith. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Deezer, and wherever you find your podcast episodes. At least monthly. No, we do not print them anymore. It's audio only and a bit of video if you're watching on YouTube with the subtitles. We have merchandise, shop.ithorrorstories.eu, or you can support us via Ko-fi. If you are outside of Europe, be sure to change your region once you get into the shop, or find the link on our webpage, ithorrorstories.eu, together with everything else. If you like social media, we have Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. Thanks for tuning in. Until the next time, don't forget, you're one of us. Bye-bye.